CLOG2, CLOG3 from the Canon R5 C. I've got two of these cameras in addition to my Red, and I've been using the Canon R5 Cs more often for my projects. I have pulled out a handful of clips from a recent film I just wrapped up for a customer of Trans Am Worldwide. It followed his build coming together. This is a company that makes the modern day Trans Am, the modern day Chevelle. These are $150,000 to $300,000 cars. It's really important that the video quality represents that level of expenditure and that the colors are really accurate, because these paint jobs are extremely detailed. I mean, they go through so much to get the paint looking exactly like they want it, and I've got to represent that in the color grades. So it's important that the camera is representing that well. I pulled out a handful of shots here that we're going to look at. We're going to open these up. I'm going to show you the rendered version, then I'm going to show you underneath what the stack of effects is that I did to get the looks that I did, because this is all going to be inside of Premiere. You don't need to use Premiere, you could use Resolve, but I use Red Giant Color Suite in combination with Lumetri inside of Premiere. This is not really important for this demonstration, this exploration of what we think about CLOG2 and CLOG3. You can use whatever you want. That's just what I do, and I like the workflow of staying all inside of Premiere. Now, let's take a look at this first clip.
In a world where nuclear war has begun, vampires fought back in super real 3D.
This first clip is an outdoor clip. It's a driving shot. So we've got car-to-car driving. This was filmed with the Canon R5 C, as we've established. And this is the end result. I'm actually going to turn this layer off for a second. We're going to look at this one. This is the rendered clip, so we can just have it play for a second so you can see it in motion. Okay, so that's what the shot looks like. This is the R5 C mounted to the back. Whoa, we already got to one other one. That's okay, we'll get to that one in a second. I filmed this using the Tilt-A-Hydra Alien Arm system. It's the most affordable system that you could do something like this with. This is also filmed with the 24-70 f2.8 lens. I think I had it around 35, 40, somewhere between 35 to 45 millimeters here for this particular shot. And it's all filmed in RAW. To achieve CLOG2, if you want that option, in your Canon R5 C, you have to be filming in RAW. That's the caveat. I don't mind this because I film a lot in RAW, especially when it comes to the product shots. So you can see over here, I've got many instances of Colorista and Looks to achieve this end result. I could get a much punchier, more saturated look from this if I wanted. I wanted it to feel a little bit more like a film from the 70s a bit. Anyway, this is a little bit more washed out than I would normally do, but I love it. This is where I landed for this project. So when I go to the source here in your effect controls, this is where you can see your raw options. And if we look at this, what I've done is I've set the color temperature to 6300 and I brought the exposure down a full stop. And if we look at the gamma, I have used CLOG2 here. So that's what I went with for this particular shot. Now, you don't have to decide CLOG2 when you're filming, by the way. Just to be clear, if you don't have this camera, you just film in RAW. And then when you get it into your editor, you then get to toggle back and forth between CLOG2 and CLOG3. And I'm going to switch it to CLOG3 in just a second, but let's take a look at the CLOG2 for a second. The idea behind this is to have more dynamic range. Now what we've got is a blue car with white stripes in an extremely bright environment. What you're battling against is not blowing out these white stripes, right? So you want to have it bright enough that you have detail and information in the shadows, but then you're not blowing out the white stripes. Now it gets a little bit dark here, I will admit, but to be honest, I think that that's probably part of the color grade. So let's take a look at what it looks like with no effects here. I'm just going to use my global effects button. I'm going to turn off the effects, and you can see here that there actually is, we can use two hands here. I mean, you can still see in there, that's not just like black. I mean, you can, there's still information there. So I could have pulled that up more. That was really a color grade decision to have it, you know, get a little bit darker there, because, you know, shadows are, you don't have to run from shadows all the time. It's kind of nice to have them drop off a little bit. If I was to turn this to CLOG3, this is what'll happen on the immediate. So it's going to immediately be more contrast. This is with all the effects on. Let me turn the effects off for a second so you can see. So this is also with a stop down in exposure, which is a decision I made based on using CLOG2. If we look at CLOG2 now, this is with no effects on. You see how much brighter it is? You kind of just have a less contrasty image out of the gate, and it's going to be brighter. And this is part of why I still brought it down a bump to get it down to here. So the original file, because I couldn't even, was at 0. So it looked like this. This is the original untouched file. When you import it into Premiere, it's going to look like this when you have it on CLOG2. And then if you put it on CLOG3, it'll look like that. So you can see how much more contrast is immediately there in CLOG3 and more saturation's ready to go. Now, if I turn back on RFX, sorry, when we look at this with CLOG3, this is not the right grade. I did not grade this for CLOG3. Okay, so let's look at this over here. This is the next shot. Now, on this shot, again, daylit, we can look and see what I used. And here, I did use CLOG3. See? So why did I do that? I don't know. I mean, I tried it on CLOG2 and I played around with it and I just wasn't digging it. So then I clicked on CLOG3 and almost immediately had a look that I just loved. I think this shot looks killer. I think the car feels great. The color's accurate. I liked the amount of contrast that came in. It didn't look like this out of the gate. If we turn off the effects panel, you can see that's what it looked like. It was still actually a bump up. So I find that as long as I'm not clipping highlights, I want to expose high. And then in my grades, I find myself oftentimes bringing the exposure down on the raw file and then color grading from there. And it's in the color grade where I'm actually bringing up my highlights and creating more exposure back in. It gives me more wiggle room rather than crushing the shadows after it's already highly exposed. Now, I'm not saying that there's a right way to do this. This is just happens to be what I started to fall in line with when I was exploring this. I dance around with the color grade on every project. I don't have an exact, perfect, every time I do it exactly this way. I kind of toy with it a lot of different ways and find that for whatever reason, sometimes a different flow of events works for a particular project, and then I seize that and keep rolling with it. So if we click back on the effects, oopsie, and we look at this, this wasn't as many effects. If we turn off the first instance, you can see I actually got a lot there. I didn't even do masking on this to get that look. It just really kind of came together relatively fast. But if we look at this, I don't even have like a LUT on here yet. All this is to get this look, which is a more modern look. The end result that I have is a little bit more filmic. We can look at the final one there. When I say filmic, it's the shadows are a little bit more brought up. The blacks are a little bit more brought up, I should say. And in doing that, it just feels a little bit more like a film. You know, I feel like this already feels a little bit more of the modern digital look, which I love for a lot of stuff, actually. I'm not opposed to that, but for this particular project, I just wanted it to feel a little bit older. So again, this is just the first instance of Colorista, and all I've really done here is messed around with some contrast values on my wheels. I brought the exposure down even a little bit more, which gave me more wiggle room to really boost those highlights. You can see that the white is still fine. There's not blowout or anything. There's still plenty of information in the whites, so there's no clipping. Super bright day. I'll make that fit again. And this again is just the first pass. I then turned on an instance of looks. I'm putting on like a little bump of, it's a very, very subtle amount of diffusion and softness. You can see it pop on and off on the whites. I have it assigned to affect the highlights a little bit more. And it just gives it a little bit of that fade that I enjoy as if I had a filter on the front of the lens. And it also matters what order you put these things in. If I was to slide this up and put it before the color grade, you can see it's handling it a little bit different there. It's not quite as dramatic. It's a little bit softer and more spread as I drop it back over after my instance of Colorista. And the reason being that it's now seeing the highlight boost that I gave it. So the order, whereas before it's only reading the log file without that. So there's not as much punch in the whites to affect the highlights with your diffusion pass. So the order of events really matters, and I don't always do it in this order. It really depends on the shot. So you got to toggle back and forth. And you just get a feel for this over time to test these things quickly. I'm moving like molasses right now as I explain this, but well, we're just digging in a little bit. So now if I turn on the looks, this is where that film look kind of really starts to happen. You can see if I adjust the intensity here, what this is doing. It's just kind of, see, it's lifting up the blacks a bit. In this case, I kept it at 100%, and that really, it starts to make it feel like filmic to me, and a little bit older, a little bit more vintagey and retro. And then I did one more instance of looks at the end, and then I brought, basically this brought some contrast back into it. And the way looks works is that if you hit edit, it then opens a panel inside of Premiere. And then you have this, and inside of here you have tons of looks to dabble with, and then over here you have all the tools that you can assign individually. So anyway, that's that. So that was a CLOG3. Then we click over here. Now we're going to start moving faster. I'm not going to take that much time on every shot. I just wanted to get a base point of what's going on here. So if we watch the rendered clip here, we can see what happens. This is kind of just a rack focus from those plants to that car back there. Then it goes to this shot here. And actually, this is good that we look at both of these at the same time. We're going to do it. You see, we're coming up on a lit interior shot in a second, but just a couple more quickly, these outdoor shots, because this is interesting. So there's that shot, and then there's that shot. Now, I like both of these shots. However, what's interesting is that for whatever reason, on this shot, if we look at it, I use CLOG3 here. The CLOG3 just worked here for the side profile. Then for this shot, what I actually used was CLOG2 here. So I've got CLOG2 for this shot, and then I've got CLOG3 for this shot. That's out of focus because we're at the middle of the rack. And I've also got CLOG3 for this shot, and then I went with CLOG2 for this shot. And it's not like, I don't know, that's just what I ended up finding myself doing to land on the grade that I liked more. I think I was just immediately out of the gate, the CLOG2 just looked great here. I think what happens is, if I was really to analyze this, anytime I'm not satisfied with how a shot's going, one of the things that I test is flipping back over to the other CLOG. And oftentimes that resolves the issue for me. So I don't know exactly what the rhyme or reason is as to why I end up liking certain shots for certain things. But if we look at this, I'm going to give you an example. It's not like, in all these cases, none of this is in danger. I'm not having to make this decision based on more dynamic range for highlight saving. Because if we look at this, yes, this is CLOG2. Let's put it in CLOG3 for a second. And yes, this is not color graded for this. So I'm just going to turn off for a second all the effects. And here's our CLOG3. We've got shadows over here, right? And we've got highlights up here, and nothing is clipped. You can see over here. And if we zoom in on this, I mean, there's not clipping happening here. So it's not like I needed to go to CLOG2 here to get more dynamic range. It just happens to be that that worked for this particular shot. But the dynamic range of the Canon R5 C is pretty good, man. I'm telling you, like, I'm continually like, this is pretty good. I have a red, and I'm used to that amount of dynamic range, and it's like not an insane amount more dynamic range. You'd think that it would be a lot more than it is, but what you can achieve with the Canon always surprises me. Not to say that I don't blow out clip. I mean, I get clipping. I get clipping on a red sometimes too, if given the situation. It just depends on how fast things are moving and what's happening. All right, let's look at this, a couple of interior shots real quick. We're almost done with this. Interior, this is lit. I set up a bunch of lights for this, and I'm gonna do a full behind the scenes on making this film where I'm gonna talk about lighting, camera work, lensing, use of the R5 Cs, working with the clients, the traveling. We're gonna go over a bunch of stuff, what it takes to do a project like this. As primarily one person, I brought my son out with me to help film at SEMA in Las Vegas for that particular live thing. But other than that, I think everything else I shot by myself. Okay, so look at this shot. Came out pretty cool. I could have gone more contrasty and darker than this, but I was just digging the film kind of faded, a little bit of fade in here. So I wanted that vibe. If we turn off the effects for a second, we can see everything's there. This is definitely clipped, yes. I put a light right there. I knew I was gonna clip this. The red would not have this information in there either. It's a straight up light, and I let it blow out, and I love it. I think it looks great. It just, the color of it and everything, it worked out how I wanted. I wanted something to blow out with highlights and diffusion, so it would work off of these optical glow passes that I added to it, so it would give some fade. The optical glow is something that comes inside of the Red Giant color suite. If you get like the full Red Giant suite, you have access to Universe and VFX. I think it's in their VFX line. And so anyway, it's just one of the plugins that's in there, and I really like it a lot. Let's look at what I did here. I used Canon CLOG2 to get this, okay? So the thing about this is, if we went to CLOG3, yeah, I mean, in general, I oftentimes go to CLOG3 when it's a controlled environment. And CLOG2 just worked here, so I went with it. I think it came up looking pretty good. And then here is another shot, and we can see, let's just look at this real quick, if it was the rendered version, so we can play without skipping a beat. And it's playing back at half resolution right now, but okay, so you can see that full shot. That was on a slider with the R5 C. If we turn this back on, let's take a look at what I used. And yeah, I stuck with CLOG2 here as well. Now, I will say, honestly, I didn't pull it out, but there are other shots that I ended up finding myself using CLOG3 for some of these interior shots. And then here's one more example of something. So let's get the crop bars back on this. This was designed for crop bars. So let's get a little bit more of a flattering moment. So here's an interview setup. If we turn, oh, I didn't unrender this. Let me restore the unrendered here for a second. Turn this stuff back on, reset the size. Okay, so there's the shot. If we turn off all the effects, that's what it looks like without any effects. That's just the log, and let's see what log it was. It was CLOG2 as well. I will say, I found myself using CLOG3 more in the other videos that I did for Trans Am Worldwide that were more contrasty, more saturated, and pushing the faded film look less. It was like, those were more digital, modern, focused on it being a modern Chevelle more than this project. This project was for a customer. He's in his 70s. Nice guy, but I just felt like this needs to feel older. I just wanted this to feel more like his era. And so I found that CLOG2 in general got me to that faded film look a little bit faster. So for the vintagey stuff, maybe CLOG2 might be more the go-to, but I'm not gonna say that I exclusively use CLOG2, because I use CLOG3 and other stuff too. And I did a lot of filming for sections that was in XFAVC, which I'll just queue up and play while I'm talking here real quick. And those are all CLOG3. I mean, everything that you're filming in a compressed codec on the Canon R5 C is CLOG3. And I still got it to feel pretty like old. So I feel like you can get it going both ways. I think my takeaway from this is what you really start to hear me say over the course of showing this, is that start with one. If you want to start with CLOG2, because ultimately it's potentially got more dynamic range, which it does on technically. It's going to be a little bit noisier, although I love it sometimes. Start there. If it doesn't work for you, if you're having trouble with it, try CLOG3. Don't feel like you're stuck to CLOG2. CLOG3 might really be something to investigate. Turn off all the effects that you put on it, and then kind of just rebuild it for a second with the same set of effects, so you can copy paste them or whatever. I guess if you're in Resolve, it'd be a whole different process. But my point is that just mess with it a little bit in CLOG3 and see if you arrive at a look almost immediately, and vice versa. If you're in CLOG3, try CLOG2 and just see if it just gets you to a different point. I'll give one example, and this is a little bit of a weird metaphor, or analogy. I am a musician and I play guitar, and if I pick up a guitar, any guitar, I will come up with something different on each guitar that I pick up. There's something about the way the fretboard is, and the wood and the tone, and I just end up coming up with different stuff. And I've talked to a lot of musicians about this, and I've never met someone that didn't say that was the case for them. You're going to arrive at a different place if you have a different starting point, you know? And so I think that with CLOG2 and CLOG3, they're just both worth dabbling with, and I think that the dynamic range hunt isn't always the thing that you've got to stick to, you know. Sometimes something just looks better and you can get it to look right. And the dynamic range in the CLOG3 is really good. I mean, you know, as if you were controlling the camera decently, you're almost always going to be able to retain your highlights and have shadow detail in it. Almost always. It surprises me in tough situations how well it does. Would I like for it to have 3 more stops of dynamic range? Sure. R5 C2, do it. Give it to me. I'm all about it. Would I like to have CLOG2 as an option inside of my compressed codecs? Yeah, sure. Give it to me. I will take it. But my point is that, you know, if you are using the R5 C and you're using XFAVC and all that, CLOG3 ain't bad, man. It comes out great. Take care, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.
Movie voice.